This is a review of the Sony 16 to 35 millimeter power zoom lens. I just got this on Friday, and now I'm going to Disneyland. Now, when my oldest granddaughter, Tessa, turned 8 years old, I took her to Disneyland. But I didn't really think of the long-term implications of that. I have 11 grandchildren, so when each of them turned 8, guess who they expected to take them to Disneyland? This is Stacy, and she's turning 8. And this is my 7th trip to Disneyland for a grandchild. When I went to Disneyland with Tessa, I brought my iPhone and I documented everything about that trip because I wanted her to be able to remember everything that she did in Disneyland. Looking back, using the iPhone that I had at the time was probably my best choice. I couldn't bring my larger video camera, and having the iPhone actually turned out to be a great blessing because we were in and out of all kinds of different lighting situations. Indoors, outdoors, back in again, different colors of lights. The iPhone handles that with relative ease. So in subsequent trips I took with the grandchildren, I started bringing a nicer camera. But sometimes in the hustle and bustle of everything, I would have a hard time grabbing the exposure. Because, you have little dials in the back and it was kind of hard to like turn this, turn that up here. Oh, I got to adjust this, Yes, there's an automatic setting on my camera, but I've never used it. Maybe I should have. And then I bought the Sony 24mm 1.4 lens. And this kind of changed everything for me. I'll get to the new power zoom in a minute, but first, let me talk a little bit about my Sony 24mm lens. And it's a G Master lens, which means it gets its own little logo, which makes it somehow cool. But one of the things that it had on it that I didn't think that I even needed was this little aperture ring on here. And so you can click it here to change the aperture. This is declickable, so I can turn it right here with that switch. And now I get a smooth turn as I go through this aperture. I could just reach down and just dial it in. It was fantastic. And guess what? Even though the new power zoom by Sony is not a G Master lens, it has a declickable aperture ring. It was one of the things that convinced me that I needed to pre-order it. Now, zooming in a video is something I haven't done since my camcorder days, and even then, I shied away from the zoom because it wasn't very professional. Hollywood films don't typically use the zoom, and it's kind of rare when they do, and when they do, you're kind of going like, why are they doing a homemade video? I don't know, it looks a little weird. So that's how I've always thought about it. It was kind of fun to play with here, but I don't think that the power zoom is any reason to buy the power zoom lens. So if I'm not into zooming, then why would I buy this lens? I think what attracted me most to this lens was that it was light and compact. I had a previous lens, a 14 to 24 Sigma, and that thing was a beast. It was incredibly heavy. It stuck way out. It was very difficult to use. You couldn't thread on a filter to it. You had to put all your filters in the back of the lens. I used it a couple of times. It does make great images, but I just never picked it up out of the case again. Every time I went to shoot, it just seemed like, that lens. Too heavy, too hard, too difficult to set up. So I sold that lens. But when I saw this lens, I thought, okay, this is a lens I can see going into my kit. You slap it on, get a couple focal lengths out of it, and it's going to have a really good image. It only has really one downside that I can see, and that is its f-stop is 4.0. When I went to Disneyland, my plan was to shoot half of the day with the power zoom and then half of the day with my old 24mm lens. And I was having a really good time with the power zoom, and I didn't really see the need to switch back over to my 24mm lens. My camera can do well in low light. I can bump the ISO and there will be no problem. And so I was getting what I thought was really good shots. And then the sun went down and I started to think, well, it would be nice to get a little bit more light. So I put on the 24mm lens, and then I remembered what I had forgotten. The 24mm is kind of a magic lens. It does two things really well. One, If you're back a little ways, it gets things in really good focus. It is a very nice wide angle lens. But if you move it a little bit in on the subject and you get a little closer to your subject, then it blurs out the background in a way that I haven't seen any of my other lenses do. It is kind of magical. Here, let's try a little experiment. All right, so I've set up both lenses onto separate cameras, and one is an A7 IV and the other is an A7S III. This is the S3, this is the 4. The 4 has the 24mm that I've known and loved. The new lens is on the A7S III, a camera that I know and love. All right, so I can't get the composition to look the same in the background, but I think you can see an obvious difference, the difference between 1.4 and 4.0. And especially pronounced if I get closer. So if I get in here really tight, you can see that the background, and there is a difference. Now, one thing you might want to recognize is that on this 4.0, I can blur out the background pretty good if I get in pretty close. And over here, I of course blow it out a little bit more. And as I get back here, I'm still blowing it out. And if I were to move out of the frame completely, then, you know, it would refocus, I hope, and look something like that. So if you ask me, my money is still on the 24mm. In fact, it costs about $300 more, but I would say worth every penny. But am I going to ship back the power zoom lens? No, because the power zoom lens can do this. And that is something I can't get out of my 24mm range. I can't get 16mm out of my 24. Now I could buy another prime, but then I'm switching. And what I need this power zoom lens to do for me, please, is to get those shots when I need that extra reach. But I also appreciate, and very much appreciate in this Disneyland trip, the ability to move that focal length from this wide angle and bring it in to an even tighter shot than my 24mm. So it will be in my kit. I see this as the perfect gimbal camera lens. I can set it on either one of my cameras and it will balance very well, and it will give me a lot of options and hopefully a lot of great video in the future. And then when I need those creamy shots, I will always come back to you, 24, because you know what? I love you. So after I pre-ordered this Sony Power Zoom lens, Sigma announced a lens of its own, a 16 to 28mm. Not quite the 35 of this one, but pretty close. And it lets in one stop more of light, and it is about as small and as light. It looks like a fantastic lens, and it is $300 cheaper. So what I really should do is send back the Power Zoom and get the Sigma. It is the logical thing to do. But somehow this lens has gotten into my head. I think I'm gonna have to keep it.